Welcome to my review of the Riverside 920 touring bike. When I originally saw the specs and the price of the Riverside 920, I immediately thought that it would be more or less the perfect bike to do the European Divide bikepacking trail on. And as that was a route I'd wanted to do for a little while, I tried to buy one. Unfortunately, they weren't available. They were very difficult to get, and they're still very difficult to buy and get. But after a couple of months of waiting, I actually managed to get my hands on one. And this review is based on the close to 5,000 kilometer bikepacking and bike touring trip I did through the southern part of the European bikepacking trail through Portugal, Spain and France, and some general bike touring through Germany. I won't go through all the specs. I will just mention how the bike has worked for me, and I won't say too much about the accessories I used during the trip. I'll try to do separate reviews on those. Basically, I've been very pleased with the bike. It did prove to be a good choice for the European Divide bikepacking trail, even though I was expecting the bikepacking trail to be a little bit easier than it was. And in hindsight, at least for the southern section through especially Spain, I would have liked a slightly more off-road bike, something with flat bars and possibly even wider tires than the 2.2 inch tires I've been using. But that was mainly because I thought the trail would be a little bit easier than it was. I rode the bike more or less completely stock. I changed the pedals to my favorite pedals, Shimano Saint flat pedals that I've been using for a long time. They've probably seen about 30,000 kilometers of use by this time. And I also changed the tires, mainly because I wanted to try these Rene Hurst Fleece Ridge tires. I'll do a separate review on those. Apart from that, everything else was stock, which actually was a mistake. I was intending right from the beginning to change the gearing. It comes with a 1142 rear cassette and a 32 front chainring, and I sort of suspected right from the start that I would need something slightly lower, especially in the hilly sections of Spain. And I was planning to put on an 1146 rear cassette, and I actually tried an 1146 cassette on another wheel to make sure that the derailleur would work with that range, and it seemed to work fine. But unfortunately, due to illness and a lot of work in the week before I left for Portugal, I didn't get around to doing it, and that was a big mistake. I really wish that I had changed the gearing. Not doing that led to me having to do a lot more hiker bike pushing up hills than I should really have had to do. I'll start at the front. The front wheel, it's a nice wide 30mm internal width rim, fitted tubeless with these tires, no problems at all, worked spotlessly. I've checked the spokes a couple of times, and the wheel runs true. I haven't had to tighten anything, and it's just worked. It's also fitted with a Shimano XT dynamo hub. And I thought right from the start that, oh, that's probably a good thing. That'll work well. I'll be able to charge a battery that I can use to charge my phone. And all in all, I have to say it's actually worked a lot better than I expected. It's connected to this cycle to charge unit that has a USB connection up the top here, and you can use that to charge either your phone, which is probably not a good idea. It's better to use a battery and then use the battery to charge your phone. And it worked above expectations. It's worked really well. It's been really handy. On the more bike packing sections of the trip, I probably wouldn't manage to keep everything fully charged. I was probably going a little bit too slow for that. But during the touring sections through Germany, I managed to keep my battery charged so I could charge my phone and some of my other accessories constantly without ever needing any other sort of power source at all. I'm actually quite surprised how well that worked. It worked far above my expectations. There is naturally with a dynamo hub a little bit of extra resistance. I don't know how much that I feel that when I'm cycling. I didn't really think about it at all during the trip. Generally really well. It's got a carbon front fork. Again, not much to say. It worked. It's handled the load that I've put on it, and I haven't really had any problems. The one thing that has happened is that in certain sections, especially in Spain, it was a little bit wet, very muddy, and there was a lot of mud build up on the tires, and it rubbed on the inside of the fork. And it rubbed so much that it's actually rubbed the paint off, and it started to eat its way into the carbon fiber fork itself. That's not a design fault of the fork. This fork actually has quite a lot of clearance, but it's something you need to be aware of with the carbon fork. It does start wearing away, and yeah, you don't want it to wear through and actually make the structure of the fork weaker. I will have to repair that. I'll put some paint on. I'll put a patch, like a bit of tape, Gorilla Tape or something, and then some extra tape around it so it'll actually protect it a bit more in the future. But again, not a major problem, and only really a problem if you cycle through places where there's a lot of mud build-up. And if you stop enough and just clear it through, I mean, it's not going to be a problem. It's got 3 mounting points for different accessories on the fork. I've used both Salsa Anything cage and these Ortlieb fork bag cages. Work well, really well, no problems at all, works exactly like it should. It's fitted with Rival 1x11 gears and hydraulic brakes. That's probably one of the things, in retrospect, after learning how much rougher the trail was than I was expecting, that I probably would have liked to have changed. I would have liked to have flat bars rather than these drop bars fitted to the bike. When you're heading down really rough, long downhill sections, you get a little bit cramped trying to brake in the hoods all the time. The one big criticism I have of this bike are these terrible drop handlebars. There's no proper drop in it. It has this forward section that makes you very hunched over, and I'm not really sure if it's meant to be when you're going downhill. I can't really use it then because it puts my weight too far forward. So I ended up using the hoods and the top sections of the bars with my different hand positions, and I never used this section at all. If anything, to lighten the bike, I could probably cut these off. That's the one thing I would change straight away on the bike, a set of proper gravel bars with a proper low section in the drops, or possibly flat bars, depending on where I was going. On the touring section through Germany, the drop bars were excellent, much more comfortable, plenty of hand positions, and they worked really well. So depends what you're going to do, I guess. The brakes worked really well. I wore through one set of brake pads in Spain. I would have liked to have had slightly more powerful and larger brakes, especially on the front. It's got a 160mm front disc. I would have liked the 180mm with a slightly bigger caliper. Again, slightly more off-roadish, basically. It's got plenty of mounting points, and everything worked really well. I used Salsa Anything cages in here, and I've used a frame bag and bottle cages, and the options to fit stuff on the bike are really good. The SRAM dub crank works well. There's not much to say about that. The rear derailleur worked well. The shifter worked well. It shifted up and down excellently. It never really missed the beat. I had to adjust it a little bit in the beginning to adjust for some cable tension, but apart from that, just spotlessly all the time. I would say that the chain, the cassette, and the chain wheel are all worn out after this trip, only 5,000 kilometers. That's partly my fault. If I would have been slightly better at cleaning and lubing the chain during the trip and changed the chain halfway through, it would probably be in a lot better condition. So, you know, but as it is now, it works and it will function for a while, but it's more or less worn out already. The saddle is a Brooks C15 saddle, and it's a nice, comfortable, easy to use saddle, and it's not leather, so it's easy to look after. I'm not sure if I prefer this to my other C17 saddle that I usually use. This is a little bit softer, but I felt during a long day, I think that the slightly wider C17 saddle might be more comfortable. You just have to try them both to see. But it's a high quality, comfortable saddle, and you just need to decide the width to know which one you need. But that it comes equipped with both this, the dyno hub, at the price is quite good actually. During the trip, I had an accessory rear rack fitted, and it's actually a Decathlon original rack for the touring series, and it mounts on 3 points on the chainstays on both sides, and it's a really solid aluminium rack that's rated for 40 kilos, probably way overkill for what I needed. So it's maybe a little bit heavier than necessary, but I prefer to use a rack as opposed to a seat bag. I find seat bags difficult to pack into, difficult to use, take on and off, and no matter what you do or how you pack them, they tend to wobble around a bit. Also, with the rack, you always have the option of strapping extra stuff onto it. So it leaves you with much more options. So even if you just have a dry bag on it and no panniers on the side, you still have the option of always strapping more stuff onto it. I find the weight penalty is definitely worth it compared to having a seat bag. When I got home, I went through the whole bike. I've checked the I basically checked everything on the whole bike. I took it apart, cleaned it, and double checked everything. And the one thing that I discovered that I hadn't discovered during the trip was that on the rear rim, nearly all the way around, in about half of the spoke holes, the rim has started to crack. There are long cracks going both sides of the spoke hole, and basically it's it's going to break sooner or later. Unloaded like this, it's going to probably last for a long while, but it's definitely cracked so much that it's not safe to use for touring anymore. I contacted Decathlon. They said come in and show us in a store. I took the wheel in, showed them in the store, and they said, oh, okay, we'll replace it. No questions, it was no problem. I told them I'd done a long tour. But the bike is rated for 170 kilos, and I weighed the bike with all the equipment on it, and it weighed 35 kilos, and with my 100 kilo weight, it's only like 135 kilos, so there shouldn't really have been any problem. But they didn't quibble. They said they'd replace it. The only problem being the wheel's not available at the moment, so I'm going to have to wait possibly up to 2 months until I get a new rear wheel. Still, I get one, and as long as I'm not riding touring at the moment, I can ride on the rear wheel and keep going as it is. All in all, I would say that the bike has proven itself to be an excellent gravel touring bike, and I would have to say that an excellent expedition gravel touring bike, because it does handle loads. It's got a lot of mounting points. It's not the lightest of bikes. It weighs in about 12.5 kilos or something like that, but it is a solid bike. Apart from that problem with the rear wheel, which I don't know if it depends on the wheel, if it was something wrong with that wheel or what's happened. I mean, the trail has been pretty rough. Everything else has proven more or less excellent. It's just worked really, really well. I have read or seen in some other reviews that people say that they find that the bottom bracket height is a little bit too high, and they would have preferred it to be a little bit lower on a more touring oriented bike. But I actually found that was to my advantage on the trail, especially on the rougher hiker bike sections, and there were some really rough hiker bike sections on the trail. I actually found the clearance to be really, really good to have. So I'm not sure about that, and I don't find any problem with it the way it is at the moment. The bike handles well. It's reasonably quick steering compared to a more modern mountain bike, but it is a gravel bike, so that's okay. All in all, it's good value for money. I'm not sure of the exact price at the moment. I think it costs something like 1,600 euros here in Europe, and with the equipment, with the reasonably high quality equipment, it comes equipped with standard, with the dynamo front wheel and the charging unit and the Brooks saddle. It's actually extremely good value. I'd highly recommend it. You want to make sure that you use it for what it's meant for. It's a gravel touring bike with really, really good clearance, and you can actually mount up to 2.4-inch tires. It's got clearance for that, so it's got more clearance than your average gravel bike. But with the drop bars and the geometry it has, it's not a mountain bike as such, and especially with the drop bars, you going downhill, longer downhill, rough sections, you do get a little bit cramped. Would I recommend it? Would I buy it again at the price? Yeah, definitely. Depending on what I was going to do and what sort of trip I was going to make on it, you're going to be really, really happy with this bike. Problem is you can't get them at the moment. I will be updating this, letting you know what happens with the rear wheel when I get it, and I actually have some plans for the bike. I will be making a few modifications where I will be trying to make it a tiny little bit lighter, and in the future I will probably use it for a more gravel oriented touring bike, for slightly lighter touring, not expedition touring or month-long touring, which I think this bike will be absolutely excellent for. But stay tuned, and I will post reviews on more of the equipment I used on the trip and let you know how I modified this bike in the future.